The body on my table today was Amazon before Amazon existed. It mastered the art of selling everything to everyone without a single customer setting foot in a store. At its peak around 1980, its annual revenue equaled roughly 1% of the entire United States economy. Today, it has been reduced to a handful of stores you could count on one hand. It did not die because it was slow or stupid or blindsided by the internet. It was perfectly positioned to win the internet, and something else killed it first. The deceased was born in 1893, a mail-order watch and catalog company. To understand how radical that was, you have to understand the world it was born into. Most Americans lived far from a real store, at the mercy of whatever the local general shop chose to stock, at whatever price it chose to charge. Sears mailed them a book instead, and that book changed everything. At first, that book sold almost nothing but watches and jewelry, until the company realized rural families would order anything they could not reach. The catalog grew into a phone book of the American dream, hundreds of pages of everything a household could ever want. By the early 1900s, the orders poured into a Chicago mail plant so enormous it was called the largest business building in the world. Clothes, tools, toys, furniture, medicine, musical instruments, all of it delivered to your door by rail. If you could name it, the catalog probably sold it, and if the catalog sold it, you could have it. This was the everything store, decades before anyone dreamed of ordering online. And then, there was the most audacious product of all. Heaters sold entire houses. You flipped to the right page, chose your floor plan, and mailed in the order. Weeks later, a boxcar arrived carrying your future home in pieces, every board, nail, and window shipped by rail for you to assemble. Between 1908 and 1940, the company sold more than 70,000 of these mail-order homes across nearly 450 different designs. You could even borrow the money for the house from Sears itself, a mortgage from the very company that shipped you the lumber. Tens of thousands of American families literally lived inside a Sears purchase. That is the DNA I found in the tissue, a company built to sell anything to anyone, anywhere, without needing them to walk through a door. By the middle of the 20th century, this patient was the largest retailer in the world. Not the largest in America, the largest anywhere, full stop. It did not just sell brands, it owned them, and they were household names. Craftsman tools, trusted in garages and workshops across the country. Die-hard batteries, sold on the promise that they simply would not quit. Kenmore appliances humming away in kitchens from coast to coast. It did not stop at products either. It sold you insurance through Allstate and, by the mid-1980s, handed you its own credit card called Discover. When you bought these, you did not always know you were buying Sears, and that was the genius of it. The company had woven itself into the ordinary machinery of American life. At its height, more than half of all American households carried a Sears charge card in their wallet. Then, to remove all doubt about who ruled retail, it built a monument. The Sears Tower rose over Chicago and became the tallest building on planet Earth. 110 stories of steel announcing that this company sat on top of the world. It would hold that title for the next quarter century, unbeaten until 1998. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, its annual revenue equaled roughly 1% of the total United States economy. Read that again. One company, 1 penny of every dollar the entire nation produced. At this moment on the table, the patient shows no sign of illness whatsoever, only overwhelming, unquestioned dominance. The first symptom is almost invisible, and that is what makes it so instructive. In 1990, a discount retailer from Arkansas quietly passed Sears to become the largest retailer in America. Its name was Walmart, and it won by being relentlessly cheaper and more efficient on every shelf. Walmart was not alone. A pack of big box specialists like Home Depot and Best Buy arrived to beat Sears in one category at a time. And while those rivals built cheap standalone boxes out by the highway, Sears stayed chained to the aging shopping mall as its anchor tenant. Sears did not collapse that year. Giants rarely do. It simply began to shrink. But the truly fatal wound was not Walmart. It was a door left standing wide open that no one walked through. Remember the DNA I found, a company built to sell everything to everyone remotely. That is the exact business the internet was about to hand to whoever was ready. No company on earth was better positioned to become the great online store than Sears. It had a century of practice shipping any product to any address from a central warehouse. It had the brands, the logistics, the customer trust, and the muscle memory of catalog commerce. The internet was simply the catalog with a screen instead of paper, and Sears had already mastered the catalog. Then, in 1993, at the very dawn of the web, Sears did the unthinkable and killed its own catalog, shutting down the 97-year-old big book that was its sharpest weapon. A retailer named after a mail-order book should have owned the web by right of birth. Instead, it hesitated, protected its aging stores, and watched a bookseller named Amazon build the empire it was born to build. The autopsy shows no dramatic blow here, just a slow, quiet failure to become the thing it already was. In 2005, the weakened patient was merged with Kmart, another struggling retailer, under a hedge fund manager named Eddie Lampert. On paper, a financial genius was arriving to save two dying chains. What arrived instead was less a doctor and more a man interested in the value of the organs. He carved the company into more than 30 separate units and forced them to compete against each other, an experiment in pure self-interest lifted from his favorite novels. Lampert did not pour money into the stores to make them worth visiting again. He starved them, and anyone who walked into a Sears in these years felt it. Shelves went bare, lights went dim, carpets frayed, and staff grew thin. The stores began to look less like a retail empire and more like a business quietly waiting to die. Meanwhile, the most valuable pieces of the body were being removed and sold. The crown jewel brands, built over a century, were carved off for cash. In 2017, Craftsman, one of the most trusted names in American tools, was sold to Stanley Black & Decker for about $775 million. Land's End and Sears' hometown were spun off into companies of their own, peeling away anything still healthy enough to stand alone. In 2015, he carved the best store buildings into a separate real estate firm called Hedge, which he also controlled, then charged Sears rent to occupy the shops it once owned. Piece by piece, the assets that made Sears worth anything were harvested and carried out the door. Through all of it, Lampert was not merely the boss, but the largest shareholder and lender, collecting on the debt as the company under him sank. The patient failed to turn a profit for 7 straight years before the end. In the 5 years before the filing, its revenue fell by about 54%, more than half of the business simply gone. After 2007, over $24 billion in market value evaporated into nothing. This, in my professional opinion, is where an ailing patient became a dying one. The time of death is recorded as October 15, 2018. On that day, Sears filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It went to court with 687 stores still open. At its peak, that number had been roughly 3,500. So more than 4 out of every 5 stores were already gone before the paperwork was ever signed. Even bankruptcy did not remove the surgeon. In 2019, Lampert bought the remains out of court and kept about 425 stores limping on under a new name. Today, the once largest retailer on earth is down to a small single-digit handful of locations still breathing. You could gather every surviving Sears store into a single parking lot. Now let me state the cause of death for the record, because it is not simple. The primary condition was a slow, chronic failure to evolve, a death by 1,000 cuts as nimbler rivals bled it over decades. But the immediate cause was self-inflicted, a company gutted from the inside by the very owner meant to save it. One wound was the future it refused to claim, the internet retail crown it was born to wear and simply set down. The other wound was financial, the crown jewels sold off and the store starved while the patient was already weak. Death by 1,000 cuts, and then a few deep ones from a familiar hand. The cruelest detail in the whole file is the timing. Sears had spent a century proving that people would happily buy everything from a company they never physically visited. It wrote the entire playbook that Amazon would later use to bury it. So here lies Sears, the everything store that existed 100 years too early and died a decade too late. It was not killed by a lack of vision, it invented the vision and then handed it to someone else. It was Amazon before Amazon, and it forgot to become Amazon when it had the chance. The lesson on the table is a grim one: being first is worthless if you refuse to be next. I am your corporate coroner, and the file on this one is now closed. Subscribe, and stay close because there is always another body on the table.